Sean McVay has retired prior to the 2023-2024 NFL season, and head coach Damian Leak of former New York Jets fame has taken over the reins going into this next season. Welcome everybody to a new series on the channel. It's Madden 24 franchise reboot with the Los Angeles Rams. So why the Rams? Well, my first thought is the roster. I mean, this roster is in absolute horrible shape. Not as bad as Jonathan Gannon's Cardinals over in Arizona, who are also in our division, luckily enough. But this roster is in a whole lot of trouble. There are holes everywhere. I mean, just check this offensive line out, man. Noteboom's 28. He's got no progress going forward. He's going to just regress for the rest of his career, and he's already a 72 overall, so just not really a, super useful guy there. We do luckily have a rookie left guard in Avila here, and he's 23 years old as a rookie at a TCU with hidden dev, which is big for offensive linemen. And then at center, we got Brian Allen, who's 27. He's not going to have much growth going forward, only regression like Noteboom over here. We do have Kevin Dotson, though, and this is arguably our best offensive lineman behind Rob Havenstein, who is going to miss opening day because of an injury that he had in practice. But Dotson, 3 years in the league, going into the last year on his rookie contract, I believe. And pretty good overall. I think he's a pretty solid offensive line for us to have. Definitely the best overall that we have on the team besides Havenstein. But then tight end, you got Tyler Higbee, who has never really, produced high-level tight end numbers. You don't really expect him to. He's just kind of a guy to have out there. I think he's good for the role that he plays in the Sean McVay playbook, but maybe you look for an upgrade there. Who knows? I think that's probably the least of your worries is the tight end position, especially with Tyler Higbee. But I think you could definitely at least look for a better backup than Long here. But then what about these receivers? Well, Cooper Kupp's going to miss at least the first 4 weeks of the season. I'm not going to be playing him despite the game not having him on IR, so I will be benching him for the first 4 weeks at the very least. But then that leaves Van Jefferson as this team's number 1 for the start of the season, and this dude is not even a good serviceable number 2. He's really more like a good slot receiver and kind of a decent third. But he's just not the guy that you want there as your number 1 or as your number 2 really either. He's not going to give you that much production out there. Then behind him, you've got Demarcus Robinson, but he's never had like a really good season. You've got Skowronek and Puka Nacua, who has had an amazing first 2 games. I think the best 2 games that a receiver could possibly have in his career. And then you have Matt Stafford at quarterback. And I got no idea what the plan is with him right now because his contract is horrible. He's 35 years old, probably going to retire in the next couple of seasons, maybe even after this year. But a 75 overall, no room to improve. And his contract is huge. After this season, it goes from $20 million all the way jumping to $50 for the next 3 seasons in a row. There's no possible way that this team is going to win games with him on this roster with those cap numbers. It's just not going to happen. So finding out his replacement, but also trying to find out how do you get rid of that contract? Do you trade him? Is there anybody that's going to be trading for him, or do you just have to hope that he retires and those numbers somehow just disappear? That's unclear to me right now, and that's one of the biggest things to figure out going forward, especially in this first season and the first offseason. And then running back, I've already made the trade with Cam Akers. I did it prior to week 1, so he was sent to the Vikings for their 2026 7th-round pick, or 6th-round pick, rather, and we gave up Cam Akers and the 2026 7th-rounder that we had, which was the exact trade that was made in real life. So I tried to match it to the best of my ability. But right now, Zach Evans is the top running back, followed by Kentrell Williams. But you probably got to find a better first option because this is not going to get anything done on the ground. We're going to average like 3 yards a carry. So the offense is really bad. and not in a good spot. It will be in a decent spot once Cooper Kupp comes back, but all the guys around him are, not good. But then you have this defense, and it's arguably in a much worse position because your only bona fide good player is Aaron Donald, who, don't get me wrong, is one of the greatest players of all time. But if he is your only good player, you are in deep crap because our next best player is John Johnson, who is 28 years old, 27 years old, been in the league for quite some time. But if he is your second best player on your defense, you've got some problems because look at these linebackers, man. These linebackers are absolutely horrid. The only decent guy you have is Ernest Jones, and he's only a few years into his career. But, look at who we've got starting out here. This is not going to get it done. You got to bring in some new talent immediately out of this draft because not even a guy in the 70s besides Ernest Jones as a starting linebacker. This is going to be the weakest part of this defense, no doubt about it. And then you go to this defensive line alongside Aaron Donald. You got Brown here, who is about to become a 70 overall. He's also fairly young at 23 years old, only 2 years in his career. But normal dev, it's going to be hard to get him up to the level that you would need from a starting defensive tackle. But then you don't really have much depth there either because you only have Jonah Williams here, who's 28 years old, and he's only going to regress going forward at normal dev. And then you have no other defensive tackles behind him. So you need more depth at D-tackle. You got some depth at edge, but it's not a lot because your starter on the other side of Aaron Donald is Ernest Brown IV here. And, although he's young, only 24 years old, he's only got normal dev too. So it's going to be very difficult to get him to a solid starting level. Might not even get there in his career, to be honest with you. And then you've got Johnson, Murkison, Turner. This defensive line, besides Aaron Donald, has zero depth whatsoever. And then this secondary is not in a horrible position. But your corners definitely are. Your safeties are, serviceable guys. They aren't going to do anything great out there. But these corners, man, your top guy being Witherspoon, and then next up is Kendrick. Man, this is rough. And I'm not sure why they have... Well, actually, we have a few more guys in here. Because you got Shelley, you got Kobe Durant. I'm not sure why the game had them defaulted to be lower on the depth chart, but they should be higher for sure. But you got Kobe Durant here, 25 years old, only 1 year into his career. Normal dev, though. This defense, look how many normal dev players you have. And then the star dev players you have are both veterans, and the only X factor you have is Aaron Donald, who's going to be retiring in the next couple of seasons. So, again, this defense, you got to find some new talent because right now, there's not really a good future here. Duke Shelley, also a young corner, but do he and Kobe Durant have a lot of room to grow with normal dev and a low 70s overall and not a lot of players around them to help them out? That's one of the biggest questions these first couple of seasons. And this draft class really does have talent that could really help us out, especially with these offensive tackles, because Havenstein is pretty old. He's going to probably either not get re-signed in the next year or two, or he'll just retire at some point soon. And so then you have another offensive line hole. But we could definitely at least use a better left tackle. And you've got 4 tackles in the top 10 here. Harvey Green, Caleb Brown, Mark Houghton, and Eric Clifton. So options there. You have 3 top 5 corners in this draft with Lindsey Johnson, Darius Richards, and Jamie Cooper. So, again, options for either side of the ball. There's only one quarterback here in the top 10. It's George Johnson out of Oklahoma. But I think there are guys in this draft class that you could look at in the first round that could really give you a boost. Even the first 3 rounds. The first 3 rounds, 4 rounds maybe, could get you 3 to 4 starter-level players compared to what you already have on the roster. There's also plenty of linebackers here in the middle of the first round and also later on, too. You got some more defensive linemen down here as well, which is another point of emphasis for us to look at. in the offseason. So, I mean, you pretty much go best available here, and you're probably not going to be taking a bad pick. And I do already have our region breakdown and our scouts all set up. So we got Alessia Trinko being our top scout here nationally, looking at corners and receivers because, why not? Trying to get the best of both worlds. Then you got Reginald Watkins here in the Western region, looking at defensive tackles and middle linebackers. In Central, you've got Anna Hahn looking at offensive and defensive tackles as well. In Northeast, Carter Knights looking at more offensive tackles and defensive ends. And then you got Brian Axford here in the Southeast looking at outside linebackers and more offensive tackles. Offensive line is a big focus because the offensive line can make or break your season. In terms of team future salaries, here's what it looks like. You got Cooper Kupp, Aaron Donald, and Matt Stafford as your top three. We do about $24 million in cap space right now, which if you don't use any of that, then it will roll over into the next season, which I will show the cap numbers for that here in a moment. But we've already talked about Stafford's horrible contract, but Aaron Donald is on contract for this year and next year only, nothing after that, so he might retire in these next 1 or 2 seasons. Cooper Kupp is on contract through the 2026 season, so he's here for a while on a pretty big contract, the biggest, at least for this season. Then you got Havenstein, who I've already talked about, but his numbers go up by $5 million going into next year. But Tyler Higbee's on an expiring deal. Noteboom is making $20 million next year. I am not going to let that happen. Noteboom's got to be out of here, man. $20 million for this guy at left tackle? I don't think so. Brian Allen, I think $8 million is too much for him. But also, offensive linemen are few and far between. So it's going to be difficult finding the right balance between, what does the overall say versus what does the contract say, because that could be a huge indicator as to who we go for and the kind of contracts that we hand out to possible free agents. But aside from those guys, no other huge contracts to really talk about, which is why we have so much cap space right now. And let's go and dive into the cap space for next year. In the top right, we've got $58 million in cap room as of right now for the next offseason. That does not include any signings that we make that take away from that. So if we re-sign any of these players on this list right here, then that $58 million goes down. That also does not include the rollover cap from this year. So whatever we don't spend this year, and whatever we don't spend on re-signing these guys will be the cap room for next season. But there's not a lot of guys in here that I'm really thinking about re-signing. Brett Maher maybe if he kicks well this season, but he's kind of a spotty guy. But most of these guys are just backups that you can easily replace for the same or cheaper contracts. But then up here is when you get into the more questionable decisions. Who do you take? Who do you keep? Not a lot of money to give out, but definitely some questions about who we bring back. And this schedule this year does not favor us at all. We open the year against Seattle, but then after that, you face the 49ers, Bengals, Colts, and Eagles. You could very well go 0-4 through those 4 games right there. You could go 1-3. You could go 2-2. But 2-2 is probably your best bet there. So you're starting the year either 3-2 or 2-3 at the very least. And then you face the Cardinals, which that could be a toss-up. These two teams are similar in roster. We have a couple better players than they do, but they're not going to lose every game, I don't think. The Steelers, they're probably a better team than us right now. The Cowboys definitely are. The Packers are probably going to be around 500, I would have to imagine. You play the Seahawks again and the Cardinals again. Then you play the Browns, who are probably going to be vying for first place in the AFC North. Same goes for the Ravens. The Commanders may or may not be good. Who knows? The Saints have a good defense. The Giants are kind of a toss-up, and the Niners again. So a couple of toss-ups in there, a couple of 50-50s, but a large amount of games here on the schedule that you scratch your head and go, well, that's probably going to be a loss there. With all that being said, I honestly want to go really conservative here with our win total and go with just 4 and commit to that goal for the year, because this team, as we have talked about, is in a really rough shape. The schedule does not favor us. And I think 4 wins is maybe a guarantee, but at least the goal for the season. And for those who don't know, I typically do my series like this. I don't actually play the game. So if you want to watch me play as the team the entire time, it's not the series for you. It's not going to happen. If you like CPU versus CPU gameplay, that is my bread and butter. So the way we do this is we jump into a game, we put our controller in the middle of the team options, and we just watch our team play the opponents, because really our job is to be the head coach, to be the GM, to make the signings, make the trades, make the roster changes, the depth chart reordering, all that fun stuff. We do all that ourselves. We draft ourselves. But once you play the game, everything is up to the players. It's up to the play calling, because we can also change our own playbook. I can add plays, take plays out, change it up, whatever I see fit. But really on the field, it's up to our players, because to me, that's the true team building exercise. Is not only can you identify the good players in the draft and the good free agents and the correct scheme fits for what you want to do, but then can the actual players put it together on the field? Have you built the right scheme? Is the playbook up to snuff? Is your roster good enough to do the plays that you want to have played? That's what this series is all about. That's what my entire channel is all about, is doing this in every sports game. So CPU versus CPU, we watch from a broadcast angle. We usually watch full games on here. So that's how I'm going to rock with this. And I do have a question, so leave your feedback down below. What do you want to see after year 1? Because for year 1, I plan on probably doing 4 to 5-ish episodes during the meat of the season, and then going into our first off season. But then after that, after the first off season, then we sort of slow it down and, get more in depth year by year. And usually I would probably watch about half the games and then sim the rest for a series like this in the NFL. But we could always watch every single game of each season and just do, one episode 1 week at a time. So whatever your preference is, let me know down below in the comments. I could do either one. So half simming, half watching, or do you want full watching all the time? I can do either one after the first season. So let me know your preference in the comments. But I do want to talk about also, to wrap up, my settings. I'm going to do this briefly because all my settings are pretty much taken from Mr. Hurricane. I will link his video in the description, but I will show off his settings real quick. I'm going to start with the XP sliders because these are the most important ones. I'm not going to go through these in depth, but he also has this in his video, and he explains why these are the way they are. And he's done testing on them, so go watch that video if you want a reason as to why these numbers are as they are. And also he has them on like a screenshot, so you can just screenshot his and copy along with him. But I'll also show it briefly for us. But I will have that video linked down below in the description, so check that out, please, because he's a great creator and a great slider set as well. And for gameplay sliders, I usually keep my difficulty on All Pro for CPU versus CPU. The only thing that I ever change in the sliders, at least what I'm going to start off with, is the kicking power, because to be completely honest with you, kickers usually have fairly weak power on the default game. So I up it to around 70, 75. We'll see what this looks like in game first, and then if it's too strong or too little, then we will adjust it as needed. But usually everything else is in a pretty good spot, especially for the actual gameplay, like passing, tackling, things like that. I might want to lower the QB accuracy because that could be a bit too high, but we'll see what the first game brings us and then go from there. For draft class strength, I also took this from Mr. Hurricane, and it is very important to recognize that you have to set this prior to week 1. So once you get into week 1, it's going to be whatever you had the settings at that point. If you change it prior to week 1, it will change for the upcoming draft class. So set your cornerbacks to weak, everything else to normal, because typically corners are much more abundant than any other position, and it's honestly too much. So set this to weak, everything else on normal, and you should be good to go for the rest of your franchise. And then lastly, your career/league settings and franchise settings. So skill level, as I said, on all pro with that slight gameplay change. We're going to use the simulation game style, 11 minutes of quarter length. Might want to up or lower that depending on what happens here. But we're going to keep the clock on accelerated. Play clock time minimum is going to be at 15 seconds. You might have to adjust that depending on how many plays are run, which you pretty much want to aim for about 60 plays run per team. So going to keep all the cooldown and play limits off. I also am going to turn off the home field advantage because this one is super gimmicky. I feel like it's too arcadey, but if you like the arcade style stuff, then feel free to use it, but I don't like how they've done this, so I'm going to turn that off. Everything else, though, is manual, including, very important, depth chart reordering. Keep this on manual because if you don't, the CPU will never relent on readjusting your entire depth chart if one player gets hurt and comes back. Do not turn this on. I promise you it's going to hurt you. I'm going to keep auto progression off. For us, the CPU will still do it automatically for auto progression, so don't worry about that. And then everything else is on default, except trade difficulty, which I have on hard. I think very hard is too difficult to make a trade, but hard is a good balance of what should be happening. And then free agent motivation impact, put that to very high because this means that you can't always re-sign every single player that you want to, and the CPU can't either. So I highly recommend putting on this one very high because then players are going to go where they actually want to go when they're a free agent, which is how it works in real life. Then for staff talent cost modifier, I keep that on slower because I think the pace that it's at on defaults is way too much. Injuries on, practice ones on. Progressive fatigue, I take that off because if you keep this on, even if you try to stay on top of things, starters will just not appear in the playoffs or in the last couple of weeks. It's not worth turning on. It's really poorly done by EA, so don't use that. I keep on prospect storylines. The draft timer's up to you. Everything else is on defaults, including the dev trait stuff. This is all on defaults, so don't change that. Then I would also turn fill roster off because if you don't, then the CPU will fill up to your minimum roster size if you don't have them. So I turn that off. But that is going to be it. Head coach Damian Leak will make his head coach debut with your Los Angeles Rams on the road in Seattle starting next episode. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. And if you have not done so already, please do like and subscribe. It goes a long way. Comment down below as well your thoughts on the video, on the players, on the roster, on the series, on anything else that's going on. And we'll pick it up next time on opening day here in the Madden 24 franchise rebuild. I'll see you guys there. Take care and peace.